Russia has threatened to use its Wagner forces to invade NATO's Suwalki Gap in Poland and Lithuania, a move that would likely trigger NATO's Article 5 response. A top Russian MP and former Colonel General Andrei Kartopolov has said Wagner forces are ready to strike in a matter of hours from Belarus.
Речь идет о том, что готов ударный кулак, который вот этот несчастный коридор возьмет за считанные часы.
We spoke to defense analyst and strategic forecaster Rear Admiral Dr Chris Parry about his thoughts on Kartopolov's threats.
I think when you consider what people say in Russian politics nowadays, you have to consider there's a mixture of both military opinion and also looking at their own personal position within what is essentially a huge organized crime network. And so there's a lot of huffing and puffing from these ex-senior defense personalities. And what he's doing basically is reflecting old Cold War doctrine that says that we'll put pressure on NATO in response to the problems that we're having internally. What he's gone for here is the Suwalki Gap, which is the corridor that exists between Russia and the exclave of Kaliningrad. Well, Kaliningrad used to be the old city of Königsberg. It was captured by Russia at the end of the Second World War, and they retained it as part of the Soviet Union and then subsequently Russia, of course. And they're entitled by treaty to have access along that route by rail and also by road. It's extremely silly of the Colonel General to actually mention this because part of the treaty says that it can't be militarized and any threat to it will result in it being closed down. So effectively what the Colonel General is saying is we're inviting NATO to isolate the exclave of Kaliningrad. Right now with the Russian army bogged down in Ukraine and with what I think is regime transition happening in the Kremlin right now, you're getting all sorts of threats being made against NATO, against even Russians within Russia. And this is part of a pattern. And whenever you see the Russians under pressure, they resort to threats and things. We had a situation in Ukraine where Putin started throwing the nuclear card into the ring. And of course, that was all saber rattling. He wasn't serious. Nobody took him seriously who knew anything about defense. But it's a familiar Russian tactic is to start scaring people about the sort of things they could do if they had the chance. So we shouldn't take it seriously. NATO's got easily sufficient forces to be able to counter that and prevent the Wagner Group or anybody else seizing the Suwalki Gap. The Wagner Group has had very bad experience of taking on NATO forces in Syria. When they tried to sort of provoke the Americans just wiped them out. So I don't think the Wagner Group is going to be too keen to engage in that sort of operation. So this is just huffing and puffing by some superannuated Colonel General who's trying to make himself relevant within the current political space. The corridor itself isn't particularly dangerous, but if you look at where Kaliningrad is, it's in the southeast pocket of the Baltic Sea. And of course, it sits between Poland and Lithuania. And whenever you see any exercises by the Russian group of forces in the West, and this is before the Ukraine crisis flared up, it was always based on the fact that there would be a Russian attack or defense of the Baltic states. And Kaliningrad always played a major part in that. Now, the Russians have got nearly 14,000, 15,000 of some of their best troops in Kaliningrad. They've got modern air defense and ballistic and cruise missiles based there. They also have nuclear forces based there. So it's a major thing to stick in the throat of NATO. And it would be a major problem if we had to support the Baltic states or indeed now Sweden and Finland in the Baltic Sea. So it's a very important forward base for them. It is in, as I said, in NATO's throat if we actually have to operate there. And it would be a bit of a problem. It's not the gap itself that is the issue. It's Kaliningrad, the city and the base that is there. Any attack by Russia, whether it's the Wagner Group or indeed Russian armed forces, would constitute an Article 5 situation within NATO. An attack on one is an attack on all, and that would trigger a full response by NATO's 30 countries in support of whatever country was attacked. We have to bear in mind, though, the strategic depth of those Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia is not very wide. And so if it were attacked, Russian forces would be able to penetrate pretty deeply before we could actually respond. And so we have to get our intelligence right, we have to get our alert levels right, and we have to be very certain about when we commit our forces. And that would be early enough to be able to deter Russia rather than allowing them to get on the ground, and we'd have to eject them. And we've seen the problems in Ukraine of once the Russians occupy territory, they fortify it, it'd be very difficult to push them out. And for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, it would be very destructive of their land and also their cities.